Hey, welcome back to Faith and Culture. We are talking about, of course, the issues in dealing with our culture and how we apply our faith into our current culture. And just also part of our series, you're getting to know some of our team, and we're just diving deep into their faith journeys and just even how they apply that in our current culture, in our faith, in terms of our church and all that. And today I have with me our worship pastor, Mr. Serge Moskalets. Welcome, buddy.
Hey, good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hey, tell us a little bit about, first, to go back a ways, talk about your upbringing, talk about your family, and even how you came to faith initially.
Yeah, so as you could tell, my name's Serge Moskalets. A lot of people say, hey, is that Hispanic or is that Sergio? And it really is. My full name is Serge Moskalets, and because I originally come from Russia, Kazakhstan, and so my family immigrated here to the U.S. in 1991, and we came here when I was like 5 years old. And our family came here because my grandparents originally immigrated here through Israel and basically called us out to America and said, hey, this is the promised land. And it was during a time that was very similar to what's going on right now with Ukraine and Russia, where it was like war was breaking out and our family just needed to flee and get out. So we came here and got involved in church here. And but originally my parents were very involved in church back in Russia. My dad was a music pastor, and he was like a choir director and very involved most of his life. And so my upbringing, most of what I remember is, being at church, singing. My dad would get us up on stage as little kids, and we would just sing songs that he would teach us at home. And that's really a big part of what I remember from my childhood. Was very involved in the church. And my dad back in Russia, he was just really passionate about the church because there was a lot of persecution, and the gospel was not really allowed as much as people want to think. And
So what was that like? What was that like in terms of, there's persecution, was there like strict rules on how you could gather, what you could say even, or how was that kind of governed almost?
Yeah, so I think that was really strict when my dad was a little kid. My dad told me a story about one time remembering when he was a kid being at the house and his parents would have people over and somebody would sit under the table and read the gospel out loud. Wow. So they wouldn't be discovered, so nobody would see like what they're actually doing because it was technically illegal at that time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when he was a kid, that's what he remembers. And then as he grew up, during the communism days, like it was still frowned upon. So it wasn't necessarily illegal, but like as my dad went through school, he was bullied. The teachers would literally call him out and just say...
Because he was a Christian.
Yeah, they would say, that's a Christian right there. They weren't allowed to go into universities, so no matter how smart you were, they were just prevented from going to universities.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he started obviously being persecuted in that way, and that was part of the impetus to say, we need to get out of here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was hard because they didn't know a life outside of where they lived. Just like a lot of people, where they live, it's like everything else seems like a dream. And I think when my grandparents immigrated in like 1989, they started sending photos back home. And my parents, they couldn't believe it because it was like they all bought cars. There's grocery stores full of food, and that was not the life that we were used to, and how they grew up. Like, even just to get basic things like food, you would stand in line, and even if you had money, you would need like this special ticket to get food. So it was a very controlled environment. So when they started seeing some of the photos and seeing that there was a path to get out, it was like, let's go.
What was that process like as far as getting out? How were they able to leave?
Well, my parents pretty much sold everything and started. My dad was actually building a house back in Kazakhstan, and that was a big deal because to have your own house was like a very big deal. And I think the framework was done, and he was on his way to really like finish it up. And once our grandparents invited us to go, I think it was like paperwork that they had to do where they had to like include us in that process and say, hey, I want my kids to come. Okay. My dad was like, we need to go, and just they sold everything off, and it was kind of crazy because when we got to the airport, my parents have sold everything off, everything they've owned, and just literally, and then the money system crashed because there was like war breaking out, so they technically had no money. They sold everything. I think my dad said he had like $100 in his pocket.
How old are you at this point?
I was 5 years old.
5 years old.
Yeah. And he said they got to the airport and everyone was trying to flee the country. So the airport was just absolutely packed. They couldn't get out. And my dad was like, he was very nervous because he's like, here I am with 3 kids, all our bags, and we don't know if we're going to get out. And then he said some kind of brawl broke out, like people started pushing them forward, like somebody was trying to get through. And they literally pushed us to the front of the line.
Wow.
Which was, it was crazy. Every time my dad talks about that. And they got to the front of the line, but even then at the checkpoint, they're always checking, and they're like, why are you trying to, what's your motivation, what's your intent? My dad was just super nervous, and he said once we went through the checkpoint, got onto the plane, my dad just right away just crashed and fell asleep because he was just like so relieved. Once the plane was flying, he was like, oh man, yeah, we made it. So yeah, that was kind of the process behind that.
And where did you guys first go? So you flew into where? What was the process there, and where you landed and all that?
Yeah, so my grandparents, they already lived in Sacramento, California.
Okay.
And that's where we came right away. And landed into Sacramento, California, and basically lived there most of our lives until I moved here in San Diego.
What was the reason for Sacramento when your grandparents first went there? Why California? Why Sacramento?
There was a big Slavic community in Sacramento, and there were a couple pastors who were like inviting people who were just kind of like what's going on here right now. Sacramento is a big hub for people fleeing Ukraine, and so because of that, we came here.
Okay. And so then there, you got involved in a church, and talk about that a little bit. and even the adjustment. That would not be an easy adjustment, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Did they know English, or was that something they had to learn?
Oh, no, absolutely no English.
Yeah.
And that is something my dad had to learn. He went to work right away and just went for it. I even remember myself, I only knew Russian even as a kid, and when I got to, I think it was kindergarten, I remember not understanding a single thing and just learning it as I went, and almost like just trying to speak, and eventually figured it out. Like, you know.
So nothing formal? It was more just
Nothing.
culturally you're learning because the other kids are speaking it, and
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, basically thrown in and like, let's go.
Which they say is one of the best ways to learn, right? They
Yeah.
send people over to different places in Mexico. You want to learn Spanish? Okay, well, go live with that family for a year, you know?
Yeah.
And they're really immersed in it, and you
Yeah.
got to learn it because you're learning the nuances and all that. So that's fascinating. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're in this church, and you're growing up in the church.
Yeah.
What was that like in making all those adjustments? And
Yeah. My dad, as usual, my dad is, man, he's my hero. And he never wastes a minute, and he always takes every opportunity. And once we got there, he just dove into ministry and built a choir and put together a team and just started doing music. And I remember 6 a.m. on a Sunday, we're all getting up, getting dressed, and we're going to church. And that's literally been my life for the most part. So my dad got involved, my mom obviously with him. Us as kids, I mean, my dad, there wasn't like an option to sing or not. It was like we would always sing at home. We would learn songs. And then when the moment was right, my dad's like, you're singing. And it's just like, just go. And so it was fun, but we just dove right into the community there, into the church, and got really involved.
So you're doing that. You're growing up in the church, and then when was it that you realized you're called to lead? To lead worship, and what that was going to look like. You're called to ministry, like full-time ministry. When did you realize that?
Not for a while. So being involved in the church, I remember we were a part of different ministries. We were in the young adults, the youth, like camps, all that stuff. And there was a moment in my life where my uncle, who has passed away already, he was a worship leader. And I remember, because my dad was very choir-driven, like involved in the choir, worship was something new during that time. And I remember he was a worship leader, and during that time, it just felt like this was something new and something different. And I remember we were at his house, and I remember I think I was like 15 or 16, and he said, or I think 14, he said, Serge, have you ever thought about being a worship leader? And he's like, because I really think you need to be a worship leader. And I remember that moment so clearly. I'm just like, what are you talking about? No way. Like, that's so weird. That's, I've never even thought about it. And some time goes by, and just slowly somehow start getting involved. Like, we were a part of youth groups where they're just ask me to lead or sing, and it was like one of those things where it's like, I don't want to do this, like this is not my thing. But as I started doing it more and more, I began to kind of build this passion for it, and I could identify that I'm actually good at it. Like, there's a response that happens when I do it, and I think that started helping and shaping like that direction for me, and maybe even that flavor and the taste of like, ooh, I like this, So.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think that's important when you're trying to find out your gifts. And I think for a lot of people that are listening and watching, it's it's one of those things where we have to try different things to really figure out if that's what we're gifted in, if that's what we're called to do. Don't just pick something that seems like that's the thing you want to do. I mean, you got to try it. If it's not effective, at the end of the day, God's got something else for you. It happens in preaching. It happens with worship leaders. It's that idea that, well, that's the one that gets the accolades they think. Yeah. And so I want to do that one because they're in front of people or whatever. Yeah. But if God hasn't gifted that and didn't call you to do that, it ends up being miserable, not just for the person, but for everybody else. Yeah. But you got to try stuff. And that's what you did. You stepped out, I'm going to try it. I'm going to keep, wow, this might be working, might be effective. And so tell us from that point on, kind of the process of like you meeting Natalie and you kind of growing into that role where you become a worship leader. Well, a lot of people don't understand, don't realize, especially young folks that are listening, young people that are listening, and is that it was choir directing before it was worship leaders. Like you mentioned a moment ago, you're a choir director, and you have these big choirs, and you got to manage all that, and then it becomes this worship leader deal, which is just incredible because most people don't realize that's the way it was. It was choirs for years and years and years. And I think that's a great foundation though. Like you got to be a part of that, see that, and your dad doing that. And that gives you some real chops moving forward in so many ways. But back to the Natalie question, your family, like when did you meet? How did you meet her? And kind of take us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, even till this day, I'm passionate about the church as a whole and ministry as a whole. But worship is my calling and my gifting. So we were very involved in the church. We weren't just doing worship. We were doing everything from camps, from youth, and doing worship, and doing conferences. And I basically met Natalie at church in ministry. There was a choir and a band that came to our church one time, and her dad was the bass player in the orchestra that came out, and she came along, and she walked in, and right away, for me, I think it was love at first sight, but I was like, wow, who is this girl? And I knew at that point I wanted to get to know her, and so we kept in contact, and the whole time as we were getting to know each other, it was through ministry because we were both very involved. Like, she was in choir and different groups, and we started, hanging out, going to youth groups and young adults and things like that, and then eventually started serving together. We were both very passionate about ministry and about church. And eventually we started leading worship together. My dad actually invited her to choir practice because my dad was still doing choir, and he's like, "You should come." And I was like, "Oh, that's so embarrassing. Don't do that." And but it was really cool. Like, my dad saw that we really liked each other, and he even at one point. I was my dad was having us take vocal lessons even during that time, and my dad saw that we were starting to kind of date, and he's like, "Hey, have Natalie take vocal lessons. I'll pay for it." And I was like, "What? That is so weird." But I think all of those things just kept bringing us closer and closer, and aligning like that passion and the vision for what God was placing in our hearts to do together. So we were doing the worship team, and eventually, as we were growing up through that process, at one point, I was like, I feel like I'm ready to pull the trigger and ask her to marry me, and I did. So.
And how long you guys are married now?
We are married 16 years, and we dated for a little bit longer than usual. We dated for about 4 years because we were so young. I think we started dating at 15, and but we've been married for 16 years and dated for 4, so we've known each other for 20 years now, which is crazy.
Kids? Talk about your kids.
Oh, man. We got 12 kids.
Yeah.
No, just we have 4 beautiful kids. We have Abigail, our oldest. She is 9 years old. She's going to be 10 this year. Claire is 8. Caleb, our little drummer boy, he just turned 5. And then we have little Miss Chloe. She's 2 years old, and she is the boss at home.
Yeah. So you're up in Sacramento. You guys are doing ministry together. You're at a church, and COVID happens.
Ooh.
And you start to feel a stirring because you guys are closed. A lot of churches were closed.
Yeah.
You get a stirring, and you're trying to figure out what God is saying. What happens from that point forward?
Yeah, COVID was an interesting time. I feel like it was beneficial in so many ways, I think, for churches, but I think even for myself, because ever since we've come to America, we dove into ministry. I almost feel like we've not bought in, but like really, I think fell into the rhythms here of America because it was very different. But we got very used to certain things, and I think COVID was that moment where I think everything got shooken up, including the church. And during that season, our whole family, it almost brought us back to where we came from, because all of a sudden, it did not feel like a free country. It did not feel like, all these restraints, all these things that were emerging, like the whole masks thing and churches being closed. Like, for my dad, that was like
triggering, huh?
Well, yeah, like, what do you mean closing the church? When my dad back in Russia, he took the American Jesus film from the 1970s. He got it translated into Russian, and he went. I remember doing this with my dad. He went from theater to theater, rolling that movie for unchristian people, literally risking his life he could easily go to prison. So when you take that and you go, hey, we're going to shut the church down, when the church has never shut down, even in those times in Russia.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
It's like, what do you mean?
What's going on? Yeah.
So I think we were really confused about what was happening, and it was really hard to watch all the churches do it together. Yeah. And it was like, I think there was a stirring and a passion in me to be like, I really think we still need to be the church. I really, it was hard because we had people pulling up to our campus when we were shut down, asking for prayer, talking about how they were suicidal, how they needed community. And that was tough to watch. And, that season was pretty rough for me, because it was just like trying to figure out, like, what is my belief system? It almost like took me to the core of like, what do we really believe in as a church, and who do we need to be right now? Mm-hmm. And that kind of I began kind of a searching in my heart, a prayer, really asking the Lord to show me and guide me and to see what he had for me. So
at the same time, so here we are as a church at Skyline, we're fighting and feeling the same things, not knowing you at all, but as a church, we're seeing suicide rates going up, suicide ideation over 600%, and we're watching this and we're going, we can't stay closed. I mean, we got to, people, like you said, people showing up in this campus too, crying, wanting prayer, wanting community. And then you look at teen suicide, and you just start adding all these things up, and you're going, no, this isn't the way it should be. And so we open early to a lot of opposition from our local government, a lot of opposition from liberals, people that don't care about church in the first place, but just people in general just thinking that this is the wrong thing to do. But yet our community needed it, and at the same time, we're looking for a worship pastor. We put a job description out there, and we're getting help from Slingshot. We're a company, for people who don't know, just like there are headhunting companies out there for businesses, there are headhunting places for churches. When you can't find somebody, it's a national search. And so I think it was Slingshot, right?
Yeah, it was Slingshot.
With you. And so anyway, so we put it out there, and tell us kind of your process of deciding, you know what, I think I need to look around, and you heard about us somehow.
Yeah. Well, originally I was like, well, I think, what the Lord is calling us to, and to really stand up and be more bold. I was like, I don't know if it's in California, to be honest. We were like, I think it's a different state. So we were looking at some red states, but as we were looking, Skyline came up through Slingshot, and we took a look. And the other thing I didn't want to do was, I feel like God was kind of shaking up the local church. I feel like the ways churches were doing things, I just felt like, man, it just needed to be different. And so we weren't looking for that, here's kind of what we know. We were kind of looking for something really different. And we watched the online service, and it was great. But it wasn't until I watched a video of you on the news, and you really talking about how we're not shutting down, and just being really bold. And the fact that it wasn't behind a church pew, it was like on the local news, and it was like, no, this is our stance. And one of my favorite phrases that you said was, hey, they asked all the experts, but they forgot to ask us. And I thought that was really a cool way of putting it, where it's like, we're not trying to be rude or condescending or negative about it. We're just stating the facts. Like, we are the experts in this area, and nobody wanted to ask us. And I was like, I could do California like that.
That's awesome.
So that's when we were like, man, God just started tugging on our heart for this place. Even though until this day, this is probably the hardest move we've ever done.
Yeah, you guys are embedded there, like big time.
Man.
All your family, everybody, you're other than up to 5 years old, your whole life is there. And so that's one of those things. It had to be a calling.
Oh, absolutely.
Take us through that process of discerning that call.
Ah, man, absolutely. We were very embedded in that community. I mean, my grandparents are there, my family's there, aunts and uncles, friendships, our church communities, all the churches in the area we've known, And we've finally got kind of the house, maybe of our dreams, that we kind of landed in a good area. And we worked really hard till that moment to purchase it. And
I fix it up even.
Fix
it
up.
Already pretty new, but then I saw pictures. It was really nice.
Yeah, I redid the backyard, and again, it was like, it was our dream home, and really put a lot of money into it, and just kind of wanted to make it a space where our kids could be. And it's funny, we were even thinking of like home church at that point. I think when we were building out that backyard, it wasn't just for us to have. It wasn't just like, I just want something nice. It was like, how could we have more community here? To maybe even, there might be a time that we were thinking that, like, with churches shutting down, like, we might have to do home church. So I think we were kind of mentally preparing for that. And I still remember the day as we were finishing up the backyard. I was laying down a retaining wall, and I remember kind of finishing, literally putting the last pieces on. I just in my spirit, I just felt the Lord ask me, would you give it to me? And I literally remember the time of day it was and everything, and I just paused, and I was like, that's weird. What do you mean? And after I asked that question, I was like, of course, Lord. Like, this is not mine. This is yours. But then I was just like, I shared with my wife, I was like, that was so weird. Like, what does that mean? And right after that, all the stirring began and all the things. And we never in a million years thought we would sell our house, pack up a U-Haul, take our 4 kids. I still, like, till this day, I'm like, how did that happen and go?
Yeah. It's something else when you think about the calling of God. I mean, when you really are plugged in to what the Lord wants you to do, no possession can keep you anywhere. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. I look at our journey in starting a church and then coming here and all those things. We had our dream house on a golf course. Like, I love golf. We were on the 12th hole, and all I saw was green and beauty, and I thought, I'm here forever. And then all of a sudden, God starts tapping on the heart. I want you to plant a church. And you go, if that's what you want me to do, I'll do it. Yeah. And, over time, you realize his calling is always so much more important than our comfort. Yeah. We can build comfort around us. We can constantly, that's just our nature, right? We want to be comfortable. Mm-hmm. But God, he tests us with these different things like that to say, will you follow my call? Mm-hmm. It's going to make you uncomfortable for a while. Yeah. And you guys had to go through that. You packed, like you said, you packed up the U-Haul. You got 4 kids, and this is a few years ago now. And these kids are little even. Yeah. And so you do that. You come here and you start hitting the ground running. What was that transition like? You had to try to find a house in San Diego, which, Sacramento's expensive, but San Diego, the most expensive place in the nation. And so tell us through that process a little bit and leaning on the Lord for that.
Yeah, it was, we came here by faith, and literally when we were driving in here, it was so difficult to find a place to live. We rented an Airbnb for like temporary while we were finding a place. And I remember driving the U-Haul. I was going over the overpass, and we had 4 days left in the Airbnb. Like, literally, after that, I was like, were we going to take sleeping bags and go to the gym at the church here and spend the night here? Like, we were literally, and I remember just going over the overpass, and it's a 26-foot truck. It was huge with all our stuff, and it's barely making it up the hill. And I just remember kind of the enemy, like, begin to kind of attack me and just go, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? And I'm just like, there was kind of this fear and maybe this discouragement that kind of set in. I remember reaching the top of the overpass, and I get a phone call from Sean Howarder. And he's like, bro, you won't believe this. We have a place for you to stay. My uncle moved out, and there's a place. We'll just have to move some things around. I couldn't even speak to him. Wow. Pretty much, I was just bawling because while he was talking, I was like, the Lord's going to provide.
Yeah.
The Lord's going to see us through. The Lord has called us to this, and we're going to lean on His faithfulness because that's what we've done our whole life. So yeah, we had a place to stay, and it was tiny for our whole family, but we crammed in there, and it was a really awesome time. And it was kind of like the continuation of COVID, where, our faith and our comforts were being like shaken off, and we had to really rely on the Lord. We had to really lean every time the challenges came. We had to go, no, but God's faithful. It's not about us. God's faithful, and He's going to see us through, and He has every step of the way. And so we eventually started looking for a place to live, which that was crazy because that was the heat of the market. And I was like, And every time we hit those spots, it was like, what are we doing? But, every time I'd come back on a Sunday and get into all the things we were doing here at the church, I was reminded, and I almost had to tell my wife everything that was happening at the church to kind of keep her spirit up and go, listen, God's doing some amazing things here, and we get to be a part of that. And so every time a challenge came around, we just kind of leaned on God's faithfulness and believing that He was going to see us through. And eventually, Sean is the one who helped us find a home, and by God's grace, we bought a home, which is a whole other story. Yeah. Which was crazy because the owner, we came and put an offer on a house, and the owner's realtor basically said, listen, you can put an offer on this house. And it was probably like the 12th house by that time. Like, we were putting offers on. And she said, hey, you can put an offer on it, but we have an offer that will give $20,000 over any offer. And it was like, man, what are we doing? And I was like, man, this is kind of pointless. And I kind of checked out, and I was like, okay, we're good to go, because we were looking at the house. And Sean goes, hey, could we pray with the realtor? And it's so funny. Even though I'm a pastor, part of me was like, that's weird. Why are we, do we have to do that? Like, I don't know if they're going to receive it, Yeah. So we bow our heads, and she's like, yeah, we're okay to pray. And he just prays, God, let it be your will. Whoever needs to live in this home, may be your will, and we're just trusting you, and we love you. Amen. And we pray, and we pick up our heads, and the agent's bawling her eyes out. She's just crying. Wow. I was like, wow. Whatever that is. And he basically told her, I'm a pastor of a church here, and we left, and we put an offer in, and they accepted our offer. And then when we talked to the agent basically said, yeah, once the owner found out that you were a pastor, he said that's the one. Oh, wow. Because his wife just recently passed away, and she was a Christian, and he was still getting close to the Lord, but not really. And he just felt like that was like just God's will to have a pastor live in this home that his wife was like praying for, and just like it was just crazy. And we ended up getting the house, which was just a complete miracle.
That is amazing. I mean, that's hey, God answered that prayer, right? I mean, that's an incredible thing, and great reminder for everybody. Keep praying. Yeah. The Lord wants to answer those prayers. But that also, when you talk about coming through these trials, you're coming through tests of faith. You're coming through leaving this place you're embedded. And not only that, you've built this beautiful home, remodel, all this stuff, the backyard, all this stuff that's so beautiful. And I think about Natalie because, it takes a lot of faith for you to say, we got to do this. This is what God's calling us to do. But then there's a whole other thing to convince your wife and to ask your wife to be praying along with you, because, as we know, our wives, they get nested in an area, and especially when you have 4 little kids. Oh, yeah. This is not a small journey to consider moving to San Diego, uprooting our family from this home that can fit our family to, we got it just the way we want it now. So kudos to her because of her great faith to be able to say, yeah, we need to do this. So that's a powerful testimony in itself. And I think that's a lot of the reasons why you guys can lead from an authentic place. You lead worship from an authentic place. There are plenty of worship leaders out there. They can sing, and they sing songs, right? They sing the songs because those are the songs that are out there or whatever. But your leadership in worship comes from an authentic place because you've seen it through Russia, coming from Russia to America. You've seen his faithfulness time after time after time. It's not just something you sing about, it's something you've lived. So speak a little bit to how that really drives you to lead others into worship and how you do that here at Skyline Church.
Oh man, I think this is one of my favorite topics, and I feel like this is where kind of my passion and my calling, they just meet. Because I really believe that authentic worship and anointing is not in the singing, it's not in the music, it's really a life lived out for Christ, and it starts at home, and it starts with your spouse, it starts with your kids, and I believe my dad actually passed that on to me because I watched him and my mom live that out. I watched him be in ministry and at home, and he was the same guy, and I think that was a very, very big thing for me, even more subconsciously. Like, I've never really thought about it this way, but my dad could have lived a life in a way that could have actually created a rejection for me for ministry.
Yeah.
And I feel like just seeing that my dad was a worship pastor at home, first of all. And then when he came to church, he basically invited everybody else into that lifestyle, into the praise. And I really believe that as worship pastors, as pastors, that's what's felt in a church. That's the difference. I know we're reading the book. It's called Lead Like It Matters by Craig Rochelle. And that it factor, for me, is not the coolest song, the best arrangement, all that stuff. I believe you could take any songs and lead an amazing worship service. It really has to come within the lifestyle that you actually live. And we talk about it with our team all the time. Like, before we get on that stage, where are our hearts at? Are we in the right place? Are we actually guarding our hearts 7 days a week, not Sunday? Yeah. It's been awesome to be kind of cultivating our team to be doing that, and it's felt in the worship service. It's felt when people come together, and especially getting to know the church. When you start getting to know the church, when you start getting to know the people and the things they're walking through and the things they're battling, there's something amazing that happens when we get into a worship service. It's not us performing. Yeah. It's us inviting each other and being purveyors of that hope, to worship the Lord and to remind ourselves of what he's actually done, what he's doing, and what he's going to do in our lives. And that's where I think you could take any song. And
that's what makes it believable. That's why you make it believable. It's not a performance, and that's the thing that you can get, like we mentioned before, anywhere. You can get a performance in so many places. But the fact that, like we talked about before, you're leading worship out of an authentic place, and you've been through those battles, and your faith has grown through that. You've seen God faithful. And so when you come out to lead and worship, it's believable. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's got to be real.
It's got to be real. And it's like you said, and now you're getting to know more and more people at the church. You've been here a while now, and you know their story, so you know what people are going through, and you're able to truly join in on this, and worship together. I just love that. I think that's so powerful.
But it had to happen for me first.
Yeah.
I think, with anything, you could talk about an experience you've witnessed, or you could talk about an experience you've had. And for me, it was... there was a moment in my life where, I was a worship leader and, already leading the church in worship and teams and all that stuff. And I remember there was a really hard season for me in my life where there was a lot of problems going on. There was some problems with a team member and just conflict within the church that was really weighing heavy on me. There were some family members involved. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and I rarely have this, but I just felt like, my thoughts, my mind, just the enemy was really seriously attacking me. I physically felt like I couldn't breathe. And it was the weirdest time of my life. I got up and I looked around, and my wife is asleep and she's fine. Everything's fine, but I'm just panicked. And I remember going, the only thing I know how to battle this is worship. And it was the first time, I think it was the first time in my life where I actually didn't view it as I got to go to church and I got to go sing. Here's a cool song. It was like, I need this. And I remember taking my AirPods, going into the garage, blasting worship music, and just start worshiping the Lord. And I think I did that for like an hour. And then I remember just the enemy was completely silenced. I was completely at peace. I was completely free, and I had hope for the future. And that's what worship did for me. Mm-hmm. And since that day, I'm the biggest believer in it. It's never about us doing a performance. It's never about us doing something for ourselves. In fact, nowadays I feel like the churches, the worship leaders, the creatives who got in it for themselves or got in it for some weird reason are just kind of falling apart. They're falling away because that was never the intent for them. And for me, it was like living water. And I think when people engage with that, even in our congregation, when they grab on to that and that piece of their life where they're desperate and they need God more than ever, it becomes real. Yeah. And when it becomes real for the whole church, that's when you start seeing a movement happen. When you start seeing like, oh my gosh, like we talk about it all the time. Did you hear them singing? Yeah. They're not singing because it's cool. They're singing because their life depends on it. They need it. Mm-hmm. We need it.
That's a great way of putting it. And it's a great reminder, too, the enemy, the devil, he runs. When we bring the word of God out, when we worship, he hates that. He doesn't want to be around it. And that's something to remind all of our listeners and those of you watching, man. If you're overwhelmed, and, we know right now depression, anxiety, all of that continues to be at an all-time high, a great way to beat that, read Scripture, pray, and worship. I mean, those are all powerful reminders. Speaking of specifically your week, what does it look like for you when you prepare for a Sunday? I don't think people understand. This is not something you just show up on a Sunday and it's like, woohoo, I'm so talented, I'm just going to throw some songs out there. Mm-mm. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening that comes together for a Sunday in terms of volunteers, not just on stage, behind the scenes, and then preparation for Sunday, and not just the preparation on Sunday, but even before that. Talk a little bit about how people get ready for that on the team.
Yeah, well, I got to start with the number one ministry, and you're the one who mentioned it to us when we were getting hired, that our number one ministry is our family. Yeah. And man, I can't stress that enough, because I feel like it all has to stem and start there. Yep. Before I get onto this campus on Monday or whatever it is, I need to be the minister in my home, and I need to make sure that I love my wife, and I respect my wife. I treat my wife the right way. I treat my kids the right way. I believe that's where worship happens. Mm-hmm. That's where the real worship takes place. And then obviously transitioning to the workplace and our team, and basically starts off with just getting to know the church. I think that is so important. I think worship leaders out there who think that we could just put some songs together, sing them, and then leave and not interact with the church, that is just, I think that's wrong. That's not the right way to do it, because when you start to get to know the congregation and the people of this place, then you know what songs you need to bring. Then God can speak to you more clearly about the direction you need to go.
Yeah.
Rather than going, man, this is a song I like. How many worship leaders out there go, this is the coolest song. So what? It doesn't relate to your congregation because you don't know your congregation. Mm-hmm. So I think getting to know the church, getting to know the team is vital. And then, I think taking it up to the Lord in prayer, for us on a weekend, it's 4 songs. Sometimes it's 3 songs. So it's not a lot to put into it, but it has to be felt. It has to be strategic to what's needed for that day. And I think when you bring it to the Lord that way, through that process, He speaks. And there's a time during the week that I have with our music director, Serge. He's now our creative pastor. And
just to explain, it's not like it's third person Serge. Like you're not saying Serge
yes.
third person. Some people don't know. There's another Serge.
There's another Serge
on our team.
Yes, there is. His name is Serge Moskalets. And he's a good friend of mine who actually used to serve with me at the last church I was at. Crazy story. They're also down here in San Diego now serving together. So yes, me and another Serge, we sit and just really we create a space where it's a very safe space where when you do this kind of stuff, there can't be any insecurity or competition of like, well, this is cool and that's not cool. You can't have people like that around you. It's got to be, what does the church need? What is God trying to say to us and the church this weekend? And it's really not that complex, but the Lord guides us, and we know the songs we need to do, and then we put the set together, and then we rehearse it. We make sure the team's on board with it. We definitely don't want to distract people. We want it to be excellent as much as we can, and we work with our teams to make sure that our volunteers in production, we have an amazing team. Yeah. I absolutely love our team. We have a production team and worship team that work really hard to then take that set and make it meaningful without any distractions and really allow a space for people to enter into and worship the Lord.
And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize when a Sunday morning comes and we're having service, all the different things that could go wrong. Yeah. There's a lot of technology going on. Yeah. There's a lot of electricity running through things, and one little glitch, and people are out of that mode of worship, just like that, just because of a glitch or whatever. And of course, we had several weeks in a row where power was being shut off on a Saturday night for maintenance out in the neighborhood, and it just reset everything. So we had our team coming in. Again, our church doesn't know this so often. Yeah. They're in here at 4 or 5 a.m. Before a 9 a.m. service to fix everything and to make sure things are ready so that there's no distractions, so that people can actually focus on the Lord. And so much work goes into that. And it's just a reminder for everyone listening and watching is just to pray for our team constantly. Just keep lifting people up because of all the effort. And a lot of it is volunteer. A lot of it's volunteers. Yeah. And we just can't do what we do without our volunteers. And so we appreciate that so much, but there's so many things that go into it. And then there's practice. You guys practice on Thursday, including production, including going through things like slides and making sure everything's working and making sure it all lines up. And you do all of that, rehearsals, and you come to Sunday, and sometimes it's like a blank slate. Like, what happened? Because things have been reset or something happened, so we do it all over again just to make sure it's right. Yeah. And so I think it's something that is a good reminder for everyone. It's not just a show up on Sunday and let's have church. It's all week preparation through our own spirit, through actual practice, and through repractice and rehearsal over and over again. I love what you said about that earlier when you said, you're understanding people in the church. You're getting to know people so that you really know the songs to bring forth. And it's the exact same thing in preaching. Like, you got to know the people. You got to know the sheep. You got to know the people. And the twisted scripture, often the series that we'll put together come out of people's needs. It's like, okay, what's going on? And as I'm in the lobby talking to people, twisted scripture certainly came out of people thinking that these cults were Christian. Yeah. And it was like, oh, wow, I guess And one person, that's normal. 2 people, 3 people, 10 people, 15 people. Over time, you go, okay, we need to teach on this.
Yep.
And that's how a lot of this stuff comes. As a matter of fact, folks, we'll be having a You Asked For It series this summer, and we'll be asking you, what are some of the topics, maybe Bible study, books of the Bible, other things that you would like to hear about that you aren't sure, you don't know, you don't have the knowledge of. We'd love to talk about that, and that'll be coming this summer. Just a little heads up for that, and to look for those surveys. So as you're now here a few years and you're getting your feet under you, what are you feeling is next for worship at Skyline, for your department and for what you're doing?
Yeah, we have a worship night coming up March 24th. I want to invite everybody out to that. That's going to be an awesome time where I feel like we get to keep leaning in and spending an extended time with the Lord and kind of learning how to worship too. Because I think a lot of us, maybe we're just getting our feet wet with worship, and just some of us maybe don't understand it. We're like, hey, this is great, but this is just not my thing. And worship is really a posture of our heart. Worship is, something that we verbalize to the Lord, and in return actually hear Him speak to us. It's like the Lord created the earth by speaking it into existence. And I believe that there is something, when we say something, it almost creates an accountability for us when we say it. Yeah. But when we say it in faith, there's an accountability almost before the Lord, and when we say, you are good, you are great, you are faithful, we're actually telling ourselves to believe that. And so worship nights are, I think, a powerful thing, and I'm excited for March 24th. It's going to be on a Friday night. We're going to have a great time. And but what's next is, I feel like I want our church to keep leaning in and learning the essence of real worship, and really making it a 7 days a week thing, and not a Sunday thing. So I think, as we figure that out with our team and how to engage our church more often throughout the week, we're thinking about different videos that we want to do, different chapel sessions that we've done before, to kind of keep it at the forefront and to engage our congregation that worship is not a Sunday morning thing that you do and then go home. It's just like prayer. It's just like reading the gospel. It has to be a routine. It has to be a daily thing. And that's really what I'm passionate about, how we get there and what we do. I know the Lord's going to guide us and give us wisdom and how to do it. One of my other passions and dreams is obviously to capture, what God is currently doing here in our church community, and possibly record it and maybe write songs and things like that. But that's not the most important piece. The most important piece is for us as a church to learn how to worship the Lord on a weekly basis and get better at it together. So.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that when we were taking you through the interview process and asking you questions, and we had a lot of different worship leaders that we were, trying to see who God was sending us, and we're asking the question. But one of the things we wanted to make clear was that the local church is the most important thing, because all across the nation you have worship leaders that see the local church as a stepping stone to their own personal music career. And we wanted to make sure that wasn't the case, that the worship leader that's going to be here loves the local church and loves people. Yeah. And that's been something that we were confident that's who you are, and that's who you are. You love the local church. You love leading worship for these folks. And if God takes it, where we can share that with other people, and that's awesome. We'll be glad for that. But the priority that you have is our priority too. And that's what I think this team that we have and that we're so excited about, and what God is doing so many special things, because we have that same heart, man. Yeah. The local church matters, and we want to continue to build it up through worship and the Word, and we're seeing that, and we can't thank you enough for being a part of it.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's been a complete blessing to be able to be here and to lead the church in worship, and to grow in faith ourselves through this process. And and then come alongside the church. It's just been an incredible process, and we're so excited for what God's going to be doing and the future ahead at Skyline Church.
Amen. We're going to continue to light up the scoreboard in heaven together. Thank you guys for joining us for another episode of Faith and Culture. We'll see you next time.